E41 Marketplace Ministries. It's all about your business, and it's all about our Father's business. It's ministry outside the box. No matter what your role is in the business world, E41 Ministries is a special place where we can walk worthy of the vocation wherewith we are called, just as Ephesians 4:1 commands us. In today's busy and frenetic world, it's a blessing to know that God has a plan to bring hope, comfort, and peace through Marketplace Ministry. The E41 Marketplace Ministry of the Fellowship, it's a kingdom-building business. Hello, I'm Kerry Fink with E41 Marketplace Fellowship, and I'm here together with Dave Robinson, also with E41 Marketplace Fellowship. And thank you for joining us today. We're excited because we have a couple of very special guests with us today. It's Rob Dixon. Hello, Rob. Good to see you. Rob is the CEO of Sentinel Care, which is a excellent guardianship and senior care management firm. And we're going to talk about that some more. And also Jaime Engle, good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
And Jaime, you describe yourself as a author, you said tutor, and stay-at-home mom.
That's correct.
So we're going to explore all places of marketplace ministry today. But before we get into that, Dave, let's take a minute and talk about what E41 Marketplace Fellowship is really all about.
Sure, Kerry. The E41 comes from Ephesians 4:1, where the Apostle Paul told the church, walk worthy in the vocation wherein you are called. And the word vocation is better translated calling. So everyone who is a Christian has a full-time marketplace ministry. And the E41 Fellowship is part of the Full Gospel Fellowship out of Irving, Texas, which was started by Gordon Lindsay and 18 other men in 1962. He also started Christ for the Nations Bible Training Center. And a few years ago, we were talking about the other group of ministers that are marketplace ministers. And because the fellowship's not an ecclesiastical organization, it is strictly a fellowship of people of like faith, that we should encourage and embrace all the ministers. And so 3 years ago, they actually created a place where marketplace ministers can now join as full members. And our goal is to create a forum for marketplace ministers. Given today's technology, it's going to be very easy to do to get people from around the world, because we have members in over 60 nations now. And so we want to build a bridge between the traditional church leaders and the marketplace leaders and form one team for world evangelism and to advance the kingdom.
Now, one of the things that's interesting is one of the hats you wear is you have coaching for ministers, and you actually work with pastors and church leaders, and you help them understand and connect here. Would you mind explaining a little bit about how you connect or how you help the pastors and the churches connect what they're doing on Sunday and making them even more effective at motivating may not be the right word, but empowering the congregation to really go out and be part of expanding and amplifying the messages that are taught in the church.
One of the reasons I named our ministry Coaching for Ministers is not that it's limited to church leaders, but all ministers. And that gives me an opportunity to explain how everyone is a minister. So many times when I go in and speak at a church, and I always ask the pastor for permission, but I ask all the full-time ministers to please stand on Sunday morning. So normally I know who's going to stand, and I give them all the attaboys I can and thank them for being there. And then I turn to the audience and I say, you're not in this full-time? I don't understand. I'm a little confused now. What is it, part-time, sometime, when available time, or are you full-time? And so I'm glad I came today, because we're going to be able to send you out of here today as full-time gospel ministers in the marketplace. That helps me help the church leaders understand Ephesians 4:1 and 4:11-16, how they connect together. So everyone is a minister in my world if you love Jesus.
That's a good place to start a conversation here with the gentleman to my left, Rob Dixon. Rob has created a number of organizations that really, I think, exemplify what Marketplace Ministry is about. He created an organization called Sons of the Carpenters, which was an association of Christian-based businesses, and also, even more recently, a organization that's dedicated to serving seniors right here in our home area on the Space Coast of Florida called the Golden Providers. And it was the same idea. It was a group of business people who came together but seemed to share a common set of values and perhaps even unspoken, then the faith under it. In addition to that, you also run Sentinel Care. Sentinel Care is a guardianship and a senior management organization. So let me start with just having kind of painted a top level of that. Let me have you add and expand a little bit to your background.
Okay, well, I'm married with 4 children, and about 12, 13 years ago, my grandmother, they both took ill and passed away. My father and mother also took ill and passed away, and then my daughter also was ill, but fortunately, she's doing fine today. So that introduced me to the whole world of case management and how much it was needed in the community. My brother is an attorney as well as my dad was, and they both encouraged me to get involved in senior case management. And so about 7 years ago, I took the courses, became state certified, and started becoming really a son, I suppose, although son for hire, to the elder community, so that as the seniors need someone to come alongside them to help them in whatever areas they might need, paying their bills for them, helping with doctor's appointments, managing their money, helping them with end-of-life issues, and then once they do pass, to be able to, settle their estate and stand in their shoes to do as they would have wanted done, to make sure that that happens. And so, as a case manager, I work for somebody else. As a guardian, I'm court appointed by the state of Florida through the 18th Circuit, and then I act on behalf of them as a court-appointed guardian, which is somewhat similar to a natural guardian, which would be a parent of children.
Well, one of the things that's interesting is I know in some of the discussions we've had before, you often get called in at a point of major crisis. Something has happened, and now you're literally arriving on the scene and trying to figure out how to keep it all moving in the right direction. And that probably presents you with the opportunity to see people at some of the most difficult times when they're confronting some of these really complex choices. How do you ever find ministry opportunities within that, or what kind of are there stories that come out of those kind of experiences?
Well, I was actually speaking to Jaime earlier on because my preference is to swim upstream and try to engage people prior to a crisis happening. You've heard the old adage, if you don't plan to fail, or if you don't, let's see, now I forget.
Fail to plan.
Fail to plan. And
plan to fail.
And so I've been working on trying to help empower the local community of churches to train their people to help the elder community, and so that when something bad does happen, that they don't already there's not a crisis in place because we have everything in place ahead of time. And so stepping into a crisis is very difficult. It's also very expensive because I'm running blind trying to locate assets, trying to find who their doctor is, what allergies, what the medications they take, and they might have a loved one at home that they've been taking care of. So it's very bad situation when I come in after the fact.
Right. Well, it's interesting because along the journey, I think part of that caused you to consider forming this network called Golden Providers. And Golden Providers sort of became, as I would say, one part Better Business Bureau, one part referral mechanism so people in the same industry could be connected. But there was also another part that was very strong in this, which was the accountability part, where you actually wanted vendors and people who were caring for seniors to be committed to a certain standard so that nobody was ripping, somebody off or things like that. That's a very interesting thing. And one of the things I noticed as you assemble the people, that they were very, very like in purpose and philosophy. Could you explain sort of how you came up with the concept and what made you think to go in that direction?
Well, the earlier adventure I had was Sons of the Carpenter, and that's where I pulled together Christian businesses that had a heart for ministry and also worked in their vocation, whether it be as an electrician, a plumber, a medical doctor, an accountant, a financial planner, a lawyer. And that was 2001, 2002. Around 2007 is when I started to come up with the help of two good friends of mine, Robin and Lisa. And we came up with expanding on that to look after the senior community, holding each other accountable. And yet, because we had not many, but a couple of dear friends that were not Christ followers, we wanted to include them. And so we ended up with an organization a couple years ago that had 65 businesses in both the blue collar and white collar side, looking after the needs of the elderly, including the trades, the plumber, the contractor, the handyman. And as far as accountability goes, that we encourage the Matthew 18 principle, where if you have something against your brother, you go to him quietly, and if he doesn't respond, you bring 2 or 3 with you, and if he doesn't respond after 2 or 3 other members within the organization, then what you would do is you bring before the golden providers, and then we would use that leverage to hopefully rectify the situation and take care of the customer.
It's an important way to work that. We're gonna talk a little bit more about that. Jaime, let me talk to you for a minute and say, it's interesting byline under your name: author, tutor, and stay-at-home mom. So when we're talking about marketplace ministry, maybe let's start with the last part of that first, stay-at-home mom. That almost sounds like an oxymoron, but I don't think it really is.
Right. Well, to me, I feel like I have a good opportunity because everyone I come in contact with is a relationship. Whereas when you go to your job, your primary reason for being there is to work, pay your bills. I have the advantage, I think, that when I go out with my kids, when I go to a park, when I go to the dog park, I look at that as my mission field. And I know God sends people to me at the dog park, of all places, every day. It's just, I feel very blessed.
That's neat. And now let's work backwards through it. Then we talk about tutor. Talk to us about that. How does that work?
Well, I tutor a lot of homeschool students, and most of them are believers. And I think it's such a great opportunity to take young kids. I have 3 young 15-year-old boys that we have in essay class. And we read fiction and we read nonfiction. And we just finished reading God's Smuggler. And it was so amazing to sit with these boys. And I remember being 15, and I wasn't raised quite as God-focused in the moment as they were, I think. With the schooling anyway. I went to a public school. So to hear them talk about how this book affects their lives and to be able to ask them, well, what's your mission field? And they all had an answer. So here's 15-year-old boys that already know their mission field. And I think it's a privilege and such a weighty responsibility to teach, not just writing, obviously, but to teach boys and young children the impact that their words have.
Well, before we jump to author, let's stay on that for just a moment, because it's an interesting dynamic because it mirrors the workplace. You mentioned that your school experience versus working with the children that are being homeschooled now. And I assume maybe one of the reasons that their parents have chosen to homeschool them is because they want to be sure that they're growing up with a certain set of values that they may not necessarily have an opportunity to access in a typical school environment. And that's a little bit the challenge. We're going to talk about some of the things that we see in the workplace, particularly when it's really super politically correct, things we can do and we can't do. How do we respond as Christians in that situation? I think that's part of the whole idea behind the E41 Marketplace Fellowship. But how do you contrast what you see with your own experience growing up in public schools versus what you see happening with these kids when they are having the opportunity to be learning the word from an early age?
I mean, I went to church, so I grew up in it, but I do think it's very advantageous for them, and they get to live it every day. You know, they They don't have the schedule of school, so to speak, as regimented, and that they have to waste so much time that I know most public schools do. And they get to go out and do church ministry work, and they get to volunteer, and they go out in their community. They go to the homes where the elderly are kept, and they just get to do more, and they get to experience more. And I just think it's really cool to be able to be there and stop them and say, wait a second, someone gave you a word. Well, why didn't God give it to you? There's nothing wrong with that, but let's filter this. Let's pray about it, and just to teach them those steps in being a Christian and being a believer, just like I would teach my kids, wait a second, we look both ways before we cross the street. It's just taking those life lessons and bringing them up to their age level.
Okay. And that would probably segue us into author. Tell us about what you do as an author.
Okay. Mostly I write children's books. I want to write fantasy stories and science fiction stories that have a biblical perspective. I want to make sure that when someone reads my book that they have something interesting that they may not have known if they're not a believer, that they can go out and research. I love history, so I tend to write historical fantasy, historical fiction. And I just love the fact that I get to go in front of these kids at the schools, and I get to just be a believer. And I think I heard you mention in another segment about how sometimes you don't need to preach, you just need to be. And people see that. They see the difference. And I think that these kids see the difference when I'm up there speaking to them versus when there's an author up there that's up there for themselves. And I hope that translates to them. And even if they don't know what it is, that they can feel there's something different.
There was a discussion that came up in a conversation we were having not long ago about the fact that somebody said, you can actually tell there's something different about the countenance. And it seems that a lot of times people come and go, you must be a Christian. We had an experience recently. My wife and I went to I would call it a class reunion, but in this case it was a radio station reunion. And she walked in the door, and right away, the very first thing, ran into somebody that really we didn't know. It was the widow of somebody that I had worked with at this particular radio station many years ago. And not 2 minutes in the conversation, without anything other than a hello, she looks at Tammy and says, "You're a Christian, aren't you?" I mean, and it was amazing. But that is exemplifying Christ in the workplace, I think, is really what it comes down to. So, Dave, let me ask you, how do we translate that look or whatever that is? What's the best way for us to carry that forward? How do we bridge the gap between what we're learning on Sundays to the Monday through Saturday life? How do we maximize that?
One of the things that I started teaching almost 30 years ago now is related to the little yellow sticky note. And I taught people, this is where evangelism starts. Get a little yellow sticky note and write on it a one-sentence prayer. Lord, help me be sensitive to those you're going to put in my life today. Because part of evangelizing in the marketplace is being sensitive to what's going on in the spirit world before you move into the natural world. And when you get born again, your spirit gets regenerated, but it has to be trained to be sensitive to what's going on around you. And that's one of the things that the church leaders can teach or should be able to teach their marketplace ministers is how to hear the voice of God in the spirit before they start delivering the message wherever that is. And so that's one way we can translate that. It's having presence. We talk a lot about having presence when you walk into a room. That's a God-given gift that when somebody walks into a room, they just kind of light it up, whether they're a Christian or a non-Christian. And so when a Christian walks into the room, whether they have a bold personality or a timid personality, if they're tuned in to what's happening in the spirit world, God's going to be able to use them then and draw out of other people what God's put in them as well.
When we get into this discussion, because it really is so much of it these days, so I just kind of want to open this up for the three of you to comment on. As serious believers, and you work your way out into a secular marketplace, and you find us living in this very politically correct world. How do we deal with that? How do we talk to people about Jesus in a location where people are like, oh, you can't say that here? How do we work that?
Well, I love the story of the Samaritan woman at the well, because Jesus didn't start with the Ten Commandments, didn't talk about Moses, that he met her needs, that she was thirsty, and then another time, of course, the first miracle Jesus performed was water into wine, and so Jesus was always into ministering, I think, to the body first. If you have a belly that's empty, you're not going to want to hear, or you're not going to be able to see a whole lot. So first of all, oftentimes we find ourselves ministering to the person, to what their needs are, and then that opens up, I think, alluding a little bit what you said, Jaime, that our opportunity to share Christ, and we don't necessarily have to explain the four spiritual laws, etc., but just by our life, others will know that we're Christians, and hopefully by God's grace that they'll see a difference in us.
Jesus in the four Gospels, which only covers 13 and a half days, over a 3.5 year period, asked 318 questions during those 13 and a half days. So I teach leaders, great leaders, ask good questions. Good leaders respond to questions, and poor leaders have all the answers. And so rather than going into the marketplace and telling people about Jesus, go into the marketplace, bring value, as Rob said, to the situation. That will automatically give you then the platform and the opportunity as the Spirit makes room for your gift in that situation at that time.
Yeah, I think it is about building those relationships first.
Yes.
I know when you spend time and people see that you're always happy, not that everything's perfect, but that you have a good attitude, and that when bad things happen and they see it happen, how you respond to it, that when they go through their trauma, they come to you and say, I know you have answers. I know you are different. I know there's something about you, and I need something different. What is it that you have? Because I'm done here, and I've had that happen at the dog park, my mission field, where people come to me and say, I'm done with this. I need a change, and you seem to have a change that I want.
When you say that, it really reminds me of something that you had mentioned, that what you have really put your finger on is the fact that at no time like now are people more ready to find an answer that really works for them, as other things that they may have relied on in the past seem to not necessarily give the result that maybe it once did or whatever, that there is a sort of a hunger, and it really, to me, suggests that the time is more right than ever for people to begin learning how to tap into this. And I think one of the great points for E41 Marketplace Fellowship to really make that difference is to, if it's kind of like if you have the church on Sunday representing a certain power aspect in teaching and providing word and education and instruction and that part. But if it's kind of like that's the motor, and then we have the drivetrain. And if we could get that linked up in the right way, when that part happens on Sunday, and then now the congregation is really deputized, if it may be the word, to really work with that, and they're equipped to work with that powerfully in the marketplace. It's amazing what could happen in the community. I just want to ask, do you have a comment on that, or?
Well, I think Rob mentioned it earlier about positioning yourself. When the church is together on Sundays, that's the preparation. When you go into the marketplace, that is the positioning. And then you allow the Holy Spirit to do the promoting. And if we get that order confused, sometimes we're not as effective as we need to be and could be. And so I think it's about preparation, positioning, and then I'll let the Holy Spirit do the promoting.
So if somebody is watching us and we're talking about E41 Marketplace Fellowship, What would you tell them? This is what's in it for you. This is why you might want to get involved in this. This is where we hope to see this go and the kind of difference that this will make. If
you're a church leader, then I would encourage you to look at us as an opportunity to understand how to empower and launch your marketplace ministers into not their secular job, but into their full-time kingdom calling and what God has for them. If you're a marketplace leader, then look at us from the perspective that we can help you become more effective, because we're going to create a forum through current technology where you'll be able to connect with people from all over the world who are in the same marketplace you're in, just in a different location, and also help you understand the church leaders and how you relate to them, how they relate to each other, and become an effective team in the marketplace.
Yeah, isn't that an interesting dynamic when we stop and think about it, that the time and the technology right now give us an opportunity to do things that we never had an opportunity to do. And it seems like there is a sort of a question as to how to proceed at this kind of time among a lot of people. So how do we use this technology to bring us together? Because a lot of times Christians feel isolated. It's like, well, I may be the only one faced with this situation. And yet as we share these stories, and we've heard over and over and over, that people are finding effective ways to make that bridge into marketplace ministry. Just as, you talked about whether it's a situation where you have stepped into a family situation and now you're working through that, or whether you are just finding a moment where you've run across somebody and as you're carrying out the things that you need to during the day, that becomes an opportunity to minister to them. And really, that, I think, is the thing that brings us all together for E41 and the whole idea. Could you kind of encapsulate that for us? What's the next step somebody should take if they're interested here?
Well, you're creating a platform for us, Kerry, and we want to thank you for doing that on part of the fellowship, and also a website and opportunities to have that dialogue and that forum. And so they can look forward to, in the next few months, all that coming together. And if they're interested, then just thefellowshiptoday.com, and they'll find a lot more information in the few months to come on how they can become a part.
Well, thank you, Rob. Thank you, Jaime, for joining us. We really are blessed to have you guys here, and thank you so much. And we just look forward to seeing you at E41 Marketplace Fellowship.